Salut! It's time to prepare for your test. Hopefully you've already taken the time to try and do the study guide on your own, and now this video should just go over the correct answers with you. Keep in mind that if none of or something on this video does not make sense, go ahead and jot down your questions and we'll have about 10 or 15 minutes before we take the test next class to talk about it. So first things first, the first section of the test, you'll be asked to match a French sentence with a picture that represents it. So you have to be able to read a French sentence and understand what it means. So here on your study guide, I have you writing down what these French sentences mean. So here we go. Il y a une fenêtre dans la classe means there is a window in the class. Il y a un ordinateur dans la classe means there is a computer in the class. Il n'y a pas d'élèves dans la classe means there are not students in the class. Fermez vos cahiers means close your notebooks. Regardez le tableau means look at the board. Asseyez-vous means sit down. Regardez la télévision means watch the television. Il y a, or look at the television as well. Il y a une carte dans la salle de classe, or dans la classe is there is a map in the class. Levez-vous is stand up. And il n'y a pas de lecteur de DVD dans la classe means there is not a DVD player in the class. On the next section, you'll also be faced with being able to read and understand French sentences. In this case, though, when you read them, you'll have to decide whether they're A, logical, which means that they make sense for describing a typical classroom. It's something that would be normal for a classroom. Or B, illogical, which means it's something that doesn't seem normal or regular and doesn't make sense for a classroom. So what I did on this, as far as what you're seeing on your screen now, is you're actually seeing the translation of the sentences. Not because that's what you'll have to do, but just to kind of make clear why I marked them as either L for logical or I for illogical. Technically, I guess I was supposed to use A's and B's instead, but if you want to do the same on your test, you'll be fine. So for example, for letter A, il y a un tableau. It means there is a board. So the first thing I need to do is figure out what it means. And then once I figured out that it does mean that there is a board, as in a chalkboard, whiteboard, blackboard kind of thing, I need to think about a typical classroom and decide whether that's logical, meaning pretty normal, makes sense, or illogical. And I went ahead and marked down the letter L. I guess technically I should have marked down A for logical, because it is pretty normal to have a classroom with a board. For letter B, il n'y a pas de bureau means there are not desks. That would be pretty strange for a classroom, so either B or I for illogical. Doesn't make sense for a classroom to not have desks. For letter C, il y a un professeur, there is a teacher. That's normal, that makes sense, that's logical, A or L for logical. Letter D, il y a des élèves, there are some students. Pretty normal thing to have in a classroom, so L or A for logical. For letter E, il n'y a pas de porte. There is not a door. That doesn't make any sense at all. Illogical, or B for that one. Il n'y a pas de livres would mean there are not any books. Also, that's very strange for a classroom, so I, illogical, or B for that one, depending on which system you're using. And il y a des chaises. There are some chairs. That totally makes sense. Logical for letter G. For part C, you'll be faced with filling in a blank on a sentence with the correct indefinite article. Keep in mind that your indefinite articles are the words un, une, des, de, or the apostrophe. Also keep in mind what we did in class when we played Four Corners, and that is make sure you kind of ask yourself a series of questions to help narrow down your choices. Right now, the directions on your study guide, and then eventually the directions on your test, give you 5 choices for each one of these blanks, but you can increase your odds of getting things right by narrowing down your choices with some simple little tricks. So the first thing I always want you to look for, and we're going to check for this on part A, is whether there's the word pas before the blank. Because if there's a pas before the blank, you know it has to be de or the apostrophe if the next word starts with a vowel, and you won't have to really think about whether it's masculine or feminine or plural or any of that, because if there's a pas, it's got to be followed by de. Now, for the case of part A, that's not the case, so we move on to the second check. The second check is I want you to see if the word that you're actually writing the article for, which is of course the word that comes after the blank, is plural. Usually this means that it ends in the letter S. Every now and then they get tricky with one of those that ends in an X instead, but double check if it ends in the letter S or if it's plural, because if it is, it doesn't matter whether it's masculine or feminine or anything else, you know it has to be des, D-E-S. Unfortunately, again, for number 1, when I see CD player, it is just one CD player. So that leads me to the third line of my little checkpoint system here, and that is at that point you just have to have memorized whether it's masculine or feminine. If by chance, however, you've forgotten, at least you've narrowed down your choices to either being an or une, and you've got a 50-50 shot of getting it right. So work through these very logically. Instead of just looking at the word and trying to guess, think through these 3 steps every time, and most of the time you probably won't go wrong. In this case, for letter A, lecteur de CD, a CD player is masculine, so I filled in an for lecteur de CD. For letter B, I already looked and there's not a pas, but when I checked out my word here, I noticed that it ended in the letter S. This is definitely the word for chairs, and because it's plural, it's got to be des, and I don't have to worry about whether it's masculine or feminine. For letter C, once again, I work through my process. There's no pas there, so then I check on the item that I'm describing, and here it's just a map, so it's not plural. So at this point, I just have to have memorized whether it's masculine or feminine. Map happens to be feminine, so it's une carte. On letter D, there's no pas, so I know I can skip the de and the d apostrophe. There's no s at the end of computer. It's just computer, not computers, so I know it's not des, which leads me to whether or not it's masculine or feminine. In this case, computer is indeed masculine, so it's un ordinateur. Now, if you'll notice, letter E is also ordinateur. I'm trying to show you how I can trick you here if you're not thinking about your steps. The difference between letter E and letter D is you have a pas here. Notice that it's the first thing you're supposed to check. If there's a pas before your blank, it's got to be de or d apostrophe. Now, the only reason why I use d apostrophe here is because the word that comes after the blank, ordinateur, starts with a vowel. So if you have a pas and then the word that's after the blank actually starts with a vowel, you got to use d apostrophe. For letter F, I already checked for my pas. It ain't there, so no de or de apostrophe here. When I did look at the word after the blank, though, I saw that it is books with an S, so I went ahead and used des, D-E-S, and didn't worry about whether book was masculine or feminine. And on this last one, don't be tricked here. Make sure you work through the 3 steps. First of all, I see a pas here, so right off the bat, I don't have to think about masculine or feminine or anything else. I know it's either going to be de or d apostrophe. In this case, the word livre, which I know it's cut off here on the actual screen, but livre starts with a consonant sound, so you get to use the typical de on that one and don't have to switch it up like I had to on ordinateur. Be careful when you get to this section. If you work through those 3 steps in that order every single time, you'll be in great shape to get a lot of your answers right. If you just kind of go willy-nilly and guess, you could really mess up this section. So do take your time when you get to it. Part D is just straight up whether or not you have your forms of avoir memorized. So if you need to, go ahead and pause the video and watch that song again with the G-A-I-2-A-A-S, I-A-L-A. Nous avons, vous avez, ils et elles ont. And you can go ahead and practice that and make sure that you're ready. Once you've practiced it, then it's really just a matter of paying attention to what your subjects are. So on letter A, my subject is tu. The tu form of avoir is a. Tu as 15 ans, do you have 15 years? As in, are you 15 years old? For letter B, the je form is a. It's spelled A-I, but it's pronounced a. J'ai un ordinateur would mean I have a computer. For the vous form, it's avez. Vous avez les devoirs. Do y'all have homework? Letter D tends to mix people up, and be careful because there is one like this on your test. Les salles de classe are the classrooms. It is salle with an S, so it's classrooms. So if you think about it in English, instead of saying that the classrooms have some chairs, you could say they have some chairs. In French, ils and elles is the word for they, so the ils and elles form of avoir is ont. So les salles de classe ont des chaises is the classrooms have some chairs. Julie is one girl, so even though Julie is not on your avoir chart, the word elle is the word for she, so that elle form of avoir is a. Julie a un livre is Julie has a book. Mon ami is my friend, and this happens to be a friend that's a girl. That's how you can tell because it's got an E added to the word ami. Your friend who is a girl is just like Julie. You could use the word she instead. You use the word elle in French. So the elle form of avoir is a. Mon ami a un CD is my friend has a CD. Whenever you get to the back of your paper, the nous form is avons. Nous avons un poster de Paris. We have a poster of Paris. And ils ont des DVD. The ils form of avoir again is ont, for they have some DVDs. So study those forms of avoir because they come in handy not just on Part D, but also in Part E. On Part E, you have to write your own sentence off the top of your head. Your test will look almost virtually the same as your study guide did before you started filling it in, except there's only 5 questions instead of 8. But for each of the questions, they will give you a subject. they will tell you to use the correct form of avoir and then write down an item that that person could possibly have to make a complete sentence that makes sense. Now, the item is up to you. In my case, I like to use items that are really easy to memorize and spell so that I don't have to worry about the fact that I might misspell something here and there. Keep in mind that you could also copy some items from other parts of your test. You may not, however, repeat an item once you've used it. So, for example, on letter A, the subject was je. The je form of avoir is a, so je is I have. I happen to use un livre, a book, but I could have filled in with any item at all as long as I spelled it right and put the article in front of it. Now, once I've used un livre, I can't use it again, so I can't also say that Julie a un livre because that gets kind of repetitive. So on letter B, I've got Julie, which is just like she. I could have used she instead if I wanted to. The she form of avoir is a, and then I went with un CD to say that Julie has a CD. For letter C, vous avez un DVD is y'all have a DVD, the y'all form of have being avez, and then un DVD is just an easy item to spell. For letter D, nous avons une table, we have a table. Again, the nous form of avoir is avons. Une table is just easy to spell to say we have a table. Marc et Luc are two boys' names, so I could have either used their names again or ils. That form of avoir is ont une chaise. That would mean they have a chair. La salle de classe confuses people a lot as well. Now this one, notice it is just the classroom, a singular classroom. So in English, in English though, la salle de classe, instead of saying classroom, you could say it. In this case, the it is kind of like saying he or she, because remember, every it in French has a gender. So the salle de classe, or the classroom form of avoir, is actually a. It's the same as he and she. So be careful with that. You're going to have one like this on your test. To say that the classroom has something, you would say la salle de classe a. In this case, I said that la salle de classe a une porte. It has a door. Les professeurs are the teachers. That would be a they kind of situation. So if you'd rather use ils, you can. Either way, the ils form of avoir is ont, and then I chose to use une carte for a map and say that the teachers have a map. And finally, for letter H, Pierre is one boy, so you could use il if you'd rather. Either way, the Pierre or il form of avoir is a, and I like to use un poster because it's really easy to spell. Pierre a un poster is Pierre has a poster. Again, for part E, you really need to be familiar with your forms of avoir, and you need to have a couple of go-to items that you don't mind writing out on your own to write some complete sentences. You will have 5 of these questions on your test, and they will look just like this, so you need to make sure you're prepared. Finally, on part F of your test, you will have to read an email from a pen pal. Now, truth be told, most of those vocab words from the email are actually on other parts of your study guide, so I didn't want to bore you with having to write them out again. But 2 of them that do kind of throw people off when they're trying to answer them, and those true-false questions, are the words une amie, which is a friend, happens to be a friend who's a girl, by the way, you can tell by the E on une and amie, and un copain, which is also a friend, kind of like companion. It happens to be a friend who is a boy. Go ahead and rewatch any of this video that you're not feeling real confident on. Notice that there is not a listening section on this particular test. For some of you, that will make you happy. And then make sure that you jot down any questions that you might have so we can answer them in the first 10 or 15 minutes in class before we get right to that test.